So yeah, their family, a little strange, but you know, by mythology standards, that makes sense.
Hey y'all, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today, and for this video we are going to be doing a 5x5 of mythology retellings. Before you get into anything bookish, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below, as well as tell me in the comments what culture's mythology did you get obsessed with at one point, because I feel like everybody has one. Mine was definitely Greek, but I know some people who went down the Egyptian rabbit hole, some people who went down the Norse rabbit hole, and then I also know some people who went down the Chinese rabbit hole. So I'm sure everybody has one that like especially interested them at one point in their life, or maybe you have a top 3, but let's talk about it in the comments down below. So if you're new here, my 5x5 is a series in which I am trying to find 5 5-star reads under a single theme. I've actually done 2 different Greek mythology videos in the past because, as I said, that was the original mythology stories that I really dived into when I was a child, and so I have a lot of love for them, and there's plenty of those retellings out there right now in the publishing world. And I'm always excited when I hear about a new book that's coming out that is a retelling of some other cultures' mythologies, and so that is kind of the inspiration behind this video, as I wanted to pay more attention to those that aren't specifically Greek. The other thing with that is I do feel like adult industry tends to favor Greek mythology retellings as of late, probably because of the insane amount of attention Madeline Miller's Greek retellings got. So I did want to try and make sure all of the books in this video were adult stories. I am going to be doing a similar layout to usual. I'm going to give you a summary of the book that I'll be reading, plus a 50% update with an estimated rating, followed by a final update with an actual rating. I was really hopeful I was going to find some 5 stars this time around. I'm also forewarning you that looking at this footage, you can tell I've been planning this video for quite some time. I've moved houses, I have different hair. This video project has been hanging out on my shelf of in the works for quite some time. So starting at the top is Kaikeyi by Vaishnavi Patel. This is a reimagining of the queen character, specifically from the Indian epic, the Ramayana. I did initially put this one on my TBR because I heard it was very reminiscent of 𝗖cie, a rather villainous character in the original story, kind of getting reimagined and showcased in a more sympathetic light. But I was also still hopeful to see some of that female rage in this character, slowly transitioning to being the villain of the original story. So Kaikeyi is the only daughter of a kingdom, and in fact, unfortunately, her mother is banished shortly after her birth, so she is really the only woman to take care of this palace and her father, the king. Unfortunately, that means she doesn't really have much of an identity on her own, and so she is desperate to find something for herself and ends up uncovering a interesting magic that she can use. But unfortunately, it seems the path she tries to trek for herself is in opposition to that of the god's will. Absolutely can see why this was getting pitched as similar to 𝗖cie, and I was so excited going into it.
Hey y'all, so I have hit the halfway point into kaikeyi right out of the get-go. This is a very character-based story. And by this point, possibly the development of her into this villainous mother role. Personally, I wish she was leaning into it a little bit more. We see how she grows up surrounded by men because her mother was exiled. We see how all of those relationships and a lack of relationship with her mother impact her. I think the author does a phenomenal job of consistently calling back to a lot of that stuff to reinforce how it has impacted her. Even by this point, the real plot itself is starting to unfold. Even as a princess, when she is younger, she is obviously still at the mercy of her father's whims. However, even then, she still steps in to make her own point, to try and have control of the situation. And what's really cool with that is she actually has this ability to enter a binding plane where she can actually see the threads that connect people. She can see the threads that connect her to the people around her, but she can also see the threads that connect other people. And she learns to start using that to manipulate people into doing what she wants. And that is specifically where I think we have the biggest chance to see the darker side of her. Thus far, I would say she's a little bit of a morally gray character. She definitely makes mistakes. She does do things that aren't right, but at the same time, she's still a protagonist you want to root for. You can't help but like her. Since this is covering most of her life, there are a few time jumps. I'm not the biggest fan of how those are handled. Since this book is broken down into separate parts, I almost feel like the author could have better utilized those to showcase the changing of time. By the middle part, we're really starting to dive into the beginning setup for the Ramayana, as I understand. We start to see more of Kaikeyi's relationship with her husband, with her fellow wives, with her and their children. The Ramayana is following one of the children of her fellow wives. At this point, she actually does have a motherly relationship with him, which is pretty cool, but he's a child, and the way the author's trying to kind of vilify him at this point is that he's repeating things he's been hearing around the castle, mostly revolving around the fact that some people don't like that kaikeyi is bringing power to the women in this society. There are definitely divisive feelings among Own Voices reviewers in that regard when it comes to the misogyny utilized in this story and how Patel discusses it. There are definitely some themes of feminism going on in the story, discussions around womanhood, there's discussions around motherhood now that she's a little bit older. I really enjoy the way both of those are woven within the story and the relationships she has with the other characters and how that impacts those themes. Kaikeyi is actually asexual. That's not outly stated, but there are definitely some subtle hints referencing that. As for the writing, it's definitely engaging, it flows very well, it keeps me interested in the story. There is some world building done in regards to the magic with the gods that we have seen and the religious practices. I do like that, but I want more of it as well, especially seeing as how this is based on a Hindu epic. I just feel like those aspects would be a little bit more important to the story. Thus far, I am a little underwhelmed in that regard. Overall, my estimated rating for right now is about 4 stars. I am enjoying this, it's just not blowing my socks off like I was hoping, but I'm happily surprised, and I'm definitely utilizing this as a jumping off point for some research of my own. Hey y'all! So I officially finished out Kaikeyi by Vaishnavi Patel. I have conflicting feelings. I talked about in my previous update that I was hoping Patel was going to lean a little bit harder into the villainous elements of Kaikeyi's character. Once we hit that part where she does the thing that makes her villainous in the original epic, kind of owns it. She's very darkling about it, where she's like, fine, make me your villain. And I enjoyed that. But she quickly backtracks, and for the rest of the story, she maintains the fact that she's in the right. She is the unsung hero. Kaikeyi is in the right. I completely agreed with her. Felt that what she was doing was trying to save the largest number of people possible. She doesn't explain the full extent of the circumstances surrounding this event, and that's what drove me insane. If she explained the ramifications of not doing the thing she does, then I think a lot more people in this story would have better understood the issue, better understood the severity of the situation. On one hand, there's this magical element that kind of tells us it wouldn't even have mattered, but on the other hand, that just feels a little lazy. I just wish Patel would have written that situation a little bit differently so that I had a harder time deciding whether I agreed with her or not. That would have made it a little bit more interesting, or if she had stuck true to the fine, make me your villain energy, I think that also would have been a little bit more interesting. After we passed that point, my enjoyment kind of went down. Although I will maintain the fact that Kaikeyi was a completely fleshed out character. I totally understand her background, I got her personality. However, the plot itself by the end of the book, I didn't really like it anymore. It wasn't keeping me invested, it wasn't keeping me engaged, and I didn't really find it surprising. Even when there are some battle scenes, they didn't feel suspenseful. I wasn't on the edge of my seat. If anything, I would actually say they were kind of predictable. There were also some elements that happened within this story that I think the author was doing because they are from the original Ramayana, but they just didn't really match with what we had seen from the characters Patel had created in this story. I think she could have worked a little bit better to make it more cohesive. Unfortunately, my rating for this definitely suffered in probably the last 100 pages. It did go down from a 4-star to my ending rating came out to about 3.5. Again, character work, fantastic. I will praise that. But everything else with this was just a bit underwhelming in the end, unfortunately. This just wasn't exactly what I wanted.
And unfortunately, the letdown that this one was is still so sad to me. I am very intrigued to try out more from this author, especially off of her character work. I am definitely going to pick up Goddess of the River at some point. I just don't know when that is yet. Next up is one that I was really hesitant on. It's also the start of a series, which of course I'm always nervous about, but I'd heard so many people talk about this and have nothing but praise for it. And a lot of the positive attributes sounded very up my alley. I'm so sorry, I'm losing my voice apparently. Oh, okay, there we go. That book was The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. So in this one, we were following 𝗖cie. She is the child of a chief in a very small town in far north Russia. And for most of her life, 𝗖cie has been able to see these little Russian spirits that help the world go round. Her mother passed when she was a child, and her father ended up getting remarried to a woman who is devoutly religious and believes these spirits that she sees are actually demons. The family goes along with the stepmother's wills of ignoring these and no longer leaving them offerings, which starts to negatively impact their everyday lives. While 𝗖cie continues to fight for these spirits, hoping by extension that will save her village, unfortunately her stepmother is trying to find a way to either marry her off or send her to a convent. Along with the spirits from Russian mythology that 𝗖cie can see, it also seems as though Arden drew a lot of inspiration from different Russian fairy tales, specifically Morosko, Father Frost. I was really excited going into this one. It was so up my alley.
Hey guys, so I have started into The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden, and actually have surpassed the halfway point. Whenever I first began, I was a little skeptical because though the writing was very beautiful, it flows really well, it's super atmospheric, nothing else was really pulling me in. I was having a very hard time connecting with any of the characters, but once we actually get to see 𝗖cie, the main character, really having a say in the story, I was sold. I was in. I was completely engrossed, and it's mostly because of her that once I hit the halfway point, I was like, one more chapter. One more chapter. One more chapter. Really, the only reason I officially put this down was because I had to go to bed. The setting is definitely that out of a fairy tale. I so see where people got that comparison. I mean, their town name literally translates to Land of the Forest. So fairy tale-esque. It's really cold and rough because it is set in quite North Russia, but at the same time, there's just something so incredibly homey about it. Actually, I was really struggling with the characters because there's not really set perspectives you see. It just sort of jumps around between mostly this family, but there are occasionally little sections from outside characters as well. It did sort of make it hard to get a grasp on the cast and also just kind of keep everybody straight. She has multiple brothers and I'm still confusing them because some of their names are sort of similar, and that's another thing. Also, pretty much everybody has a nickname and then their actual name. What was kind of surprising to me is that the introduction of the stepmother character was actually when I really started to get engaged, because I had always heard that she was sort of the villain of the story. She was the one that is pushing her Christian beliefs onto the rest of this village. But in reality, most of them already were Christians. They just weren't nearly as devout and pious as she is. With that plot specifically, I love that it is very much more of a cultural struggle between the Christian faith and then these pagan superstitions that have been just tied into this town's history for so long. However, 𝗖cie in particular, once she becomes more of a pivotal main character, is obviously the one who realizes how important these are. And she sees the harm that is coming to the village once they start not practicing these beliefs that they've held for so long. It's very much reminding me of something I liked in Padre Andreas's perspective in La Hacienda, where he sort of talks about the mixing of brujo magic and the faith he was raised with, and also Catholicism once he becomes a priest. Unsurprising that the religious themes are something I'm eating up with the medieval setting. Unfortunately, there is very much period accurate misogyny as well as abuse. It can get a little difficult to stomach, but I think the biggest thing that has pushed against that and really helped me to keep reading is 𝗖cie as a character and her response to all of those things. She bucks gender norms. She pushes the barriers that her father, her nurse, and her stepmother lay down. She refuses to sacrifice her own beliefs in order to make the priest of the village more comfortable. I love how she is the one that's really pushing for change in their society. We're gonna round back to the priest character. Do I like him? No. Constantine is a pain in the ass, but I think he's an incredibly well-nuanced character, and I really love how Arden is utilizing him. It is so clever. And I must admit, I love the interactions between 𝗖cie and the priest because of depth we get to see from his character in particular. Now, seeing as how the entire theme of this video is around mythological elements, mostly we have seen those in the different spirits and beings that live in this village. There's one to take care of the house, there's one to take over the baths, there's one to take care of the horses. There are different sprites within the forest. There's one for like the river nearby their village. and Vasya is really the only one who is continuing to bring them offerings. However, since she's the only one doing so, these beings are starting to fade, and with that, something evil is creeping in. I'm literally only just starting to scratch the surface of that. So excited for it. If this hadn't started slow for me, I probably would be estimating a very, very high rating, but for right now, I'm gonna put it at an estimated 4 stars because I could definitely see this going higher. I am really enjoying this. I cannot wait to continue it. Hey guys, so I have finished out The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. I really liked this. As I mentioned, I do think this starts really slow and you do have to push through that sort of initial 100 pages of build-up, introduction to all the characters, and atmosphere work. But I do think it's worth it. Once we really get involved with Vasya as main character, I was so much more invested. And I really loved her as a character. She was something that kept me pushing through. It's impressive that she rides the line between being so distinctly feminine and also very much a woman of her time, while pushing against these gender norms that the village has and the expectations they have of her, not being ashamed of the fact that she is different. And she's aware that scares people around her, but that she's not going to allow them to change how she lives her life. And I really loved that about her. I really loved the interactions between her and the priest Constantine. She refused to bow to him, and he just was not used to that and was fascinated by her because of it. He became such a frustrating character at the ending specifically, but again, I must applaud Arden's writing of him because I completely understood everything about him and why he was making these decisions, why he was acting this way. I understood everything about him, I just didn't like him. We do also get to see more and more of these mythological spirits as the book progresses. While I'm glad we saw a lot more of those in the climax and at the ending, I still wanted more from those elements. I do have to point out the fact that this is the beginning of a series, so obviously, you know, Arden could just be dipping her toes into these elements of the story and really expanding on them in later books. From the research I've done, it looks like she is mixing Slavic myths with Russian folklore, but placing it in a more historically accurate setting. But I just love the discussions around mixing these two beliefs. Something that's more pagan and whimsical, but then with actual Christianity and the interaction between those two. As I'm still not 100% sure on what was the basis of the villain and where does he come from. I can kind of understand like a broad bit of his plan, but I don't understand the specifics and like what was his motivation for what he was doing. I'm so interested to see how Arden expands on that in the later books. I'm really excited to continue this trilogy, honestly. So unfortunately, this didn't come out to 5 stars, but it is a very strong 4-star. Really liked this, and I totally understand why so many people were singing its praises because it was a great time. For the time I am filming this, I've actually finished out the entire series and I did really enjoy it, but overall this was a 4-star series. I just never really had that 5-star feeling from it, unfortunately. But I am intrigued to see more from Katherine Arden. Her newest work didn't really appeal to me though. Next, I decided to go towards Norse mythology, which I am also pretty well versed in, but honestly that is mostly thanks to Marvel Comics. So I read The Witch's Heart by Genevieve Gornichec. This one is revolving around Angrboda, the mother of monsters. So again, kind of playing on the feminist retelling of these villainous characters from the original myths and showcasing their stories in a different light. Obviously, I was so excited. Angrboda has many children with Loki, the god of mischief, but unfortunately for her, her ties to Loki are not nearly enough to protect her family as she thinks they are. And even though she does see a terrible future coming, she is determined not to let that happen to her children. Hey y'all, so I've hit the halfway point into The Witch's Heart by Genevieve Gornichec, and I must say I'm surprised that apparently I know more about Norse mythology than I thought I did when I was going into this. From the start, I realized that I really liked Angrboda, but she also irritates me to no end, sort of like how her best friend 𝗖cie feels about her. Side note, I really love 𝗖cie. She's my favorite character. The story in this almost feels romantic between Angrboda and Loki, but unsurprisingly, Loki is a terrible partner. From what we see, the start of their relationship is very based in banter, which I will admit, I did really like the conversations they had, but also with Loki always going to Angrboda when he needs help. Once things become more serious between them, he's actually gone from her more often than he's with her, and then when he is there, he insults her. He uses her as an escape from his Asgardian life. Though I do have a lot to loathe about him, I will appreciate Gornichec's writing when it comes to his gender fluidity, given the fact that Loki is a shapeshifter. Like, that is true to the original myths. And so in some more modern readings of the story, Loki does tend to have some gender fluidity due to that, and I did appreciate that being showcased here, on top of the fact that he's just like really secure in his identity, that it's never a problem for him or for Angrboda. I guess I will mention in regard to him that at least he seems like a decent dad when he actually is there. That's pretty cute, I'll admit. Angrboda, however, is such a dedicated mother, and like motherhood is definitely a theme that's just tying in throughout the story so far that I actually really like how it's being written. This story feels like it's very character focused on Angrboda herself, seeing how she's experienced all this trauma prior to the book starting and her healing from that. Her growth as an individual, as a friend, as a partner, and now as a mother. I really like when it comes to their little family that they're not normal. They're odd, but like it's their normal and that's how they treat it. But Angrboda loves them so fiercely and she's so incredibly protective of them, even if they aren't human. If you're unaware to the story, Angrboda has 3 children. She has Hel, who is the head of the dead, essentially, when it comes to her role as a god. Then there's Fenrir, who is actually a wolf. Jorgamundin, probably just butchered that. He is a giant serpent. So yeah, their family, a little strange, but you know, by mythology standards, that makes sense. Anyway, as I was saying, it feels like it's a character-based story, but there actually is a fair amount of plot taking place. It's just on the outside of Angrboda's story so far, and we're more watching her learn about these things and react to them, mostly through stories that either Loki or her friends share with her. Though, at the halfway point, she has just officially become a relevant player in the plot itself, and I am excited because of that. I also really like that with those stories Angrboda is hearing from other people, those are all callbacks to different myths that Angrboda herself is not directly involved in. Sometimes Loki is, sometimes he's not. More often than not, he is, because he's the trickster god and he cannot stay out of anything. While I am excited that Angrboda is finally starting to play a more active role in the plot, I am also so incredibly nervous that this is going to take a very sad turn. I am also not really sure if they'll be particularly unexpected, because there's a lot of foreshadowing that's been going on that is not subtle. I mean, it is. I totally know where things are going just from like a passive knowledge of Norse mythology, but also like another element of the story that I think Gornichec is trying to make surprising, but it's really not. I will say though, I'm really shocked that I flew through the first half of this book in no time at all. Not to say that I didn't think I would be engaged with this book, but I just didn't think it would draw me in as much as it did. The atmosphere is fantastic. Like I said, I've grown to care about Angrboda's character a lot. God, do I want her to stick it to Loki so badly, but I don't think that's gonna happen. And the kids are really cute. So right now, estimated rating, 4 stars. I'm really digging this. I cannot wait to keep reading.
This took an unexpected turn in relationships, and I wasn't the biggest fan of the fact that Angrboda kind of started excusing Loki for some of the things he did. No, dude still was a terrible husband and father and definitely called some of this down himself. And even in situations where he might have been trying to be helpful, to be a good person, to, you know, make up for the terrible things he's done, he still went about it in the worst way possible. But I did like Angrboda. I really liked how this ended also. I thought that was very sweet, and just like the theme of motherhood throughout it was very well done. So one that is definitely not gonna be for Jan Agaton.
This one probably hurt the most out of all of these that it wasn't a 5-star. I was so excited for it, and I'm still mad. But I do have many other of Gornichec's books on my TBR. It does seem as though she focuses on Norse stories, so I really want to find a 5-star from her. Pulling away from fantasy, I actually have one horror book in here, and that one is The Sisters of the Lost Nation by Nick Medina. In this novel, Medina actually wove together different stories from multiple different native tribes. There are influences from the Wintu tribe, the Cheyenne, the Tunica, and then several of the Basin tribes. But along with that, it also has a main focus on a really important topic, which is missing and murdered Indigenous women. Now, this is a serious epidemic that I have done a little bit of research into previously. If you have never heard about it before, I highly recommend looking into it. I'll put a link to a few different resources down below. Big issue, and it really deserves more attention. In this story, we were following Anna, Anna, a young teenage girl who unfortunately is pretty ostracized from most of her town and also unfortunately most of her tribe, but she does find solace in the stories of her tribe. The myths of her people bring her so much comfort, but unfortunately they also tend to haunt her. While Anna is struggling with her place on the reservation and in her town, her sister unfortunately goes missing, and Anna will stop at nothing to find her and bring her home.
Hey guys, so I've hit the halfway point into Sisters of the Lost Nation by Medina. Honestly, this is not really hitting what I went in expecting. I thought that the folklore element of the story was going to be a little bit more prevalent. I thought there was going to be some mythological, supernatural being involved in the story, or at the very least, like hinted at, apart from a little bit referenced in the first chapter, and then our main character Anna learning about her indigenous culture and the history of the land they live on. It's really not important to the story at all. There are some heavy topics and some really noteworthy ones being mentioned here: drugs, politics, missing and murdered indigenous women. There's also this back and forth timeline between before and after Anna's little sister has disappeared. And while on one hand it does build suspense, on the other hand, it's just made it really difficult for me to engage with this novel. I am so tired of reading about teenage angst mixed with this feeling of invincibility. There is some really heavy shit going on with what Anna is investigating. And investigating is a very strong word to use there. It's more like she's stumbling in the middle of it and constantly just putting herself into the middle of danger, trying to maybe find answers, but really failing at doing so. And I get it. She's a teenager. She's misunderstood. She is an outcast. She is constantly making excuses of why she shouldn't bring up these issues to, trained professionals or somebody who could actually help her with the situation that's going on. That said, I do actually like Anna as a main character. She's an outcast. Unfortunately, she is bullied. She is way more responsible than a lot of people around her, and she's constantly being spoken over, walked all over in many walks of her life. I do like that she finds solace in learning about her tribe and learning about the history of this area they live in, more about their culture. Again, it just doesn't feel like it's as integral to the plot as I was expecting. Plus, again, she's a dumb teenager. She keeps making dumb decisions, and it's driving me up a wall. I am gonna keep reading this. I am very hopeful that it will get better. So right now, unfortunately, my estimated rating is 3 stars. I'm hopeful it'll go up, I really am, but this isn't working for me so far. Hey guys, so I have officially finished out Sisters of the Lost Nation by Medina, and y'all, I am very glad I continued reading this book. I don't know what it was. Actually, no, I do. Once we got rid of that alternating timeline, I was so much more invested into this story. I did still have mixed feelings on Anna. In the latter half of the book, I was enjoying her so much more because she finally just got so much more serious, probably due to the fact that her little sister had disappeared. I also really enjoyed that there was some exploration around Anna's identity and her coming to the realization that she wants to identify as Two-Spirit. And that was really cool, allowed me to learn more about Two-Spirit individuals and their importance in Indigenous communities. I mentioned in the first half that I was pretty bummed out that the mythological stories from different Indigenous cultures weren't nearly as relevant as I was expecting, but the second half of the book definitely utilized those stories a lot more. We finally learned more about the story of the roaming head and the impact that story has had on Anna. We also learned a story about Two-Spirit individuals, so that kind of helped introduce that aspect for Anna to start considering. There were also a few others that were presented, and again, once those started to be referenced more and more, I also just started to get more interested in the story and learning about those. Obviously, I would have liked it even more if they were also more relevant in the first half of the story, but just more prevalent in the plot too. But I did think it was really cool that Medina mixed some of these different stories from different tribes to create the culture of the fictional tribe he presented here. The mystery itself around Grace and these other young women's disappearance also became more interesting when we stayed in that one timeline, and especially once there was some actual investigating into it. I was also very impressed with the way Medina presented the emotional rawness of Grace's family after her disappearance. You could really feel those emotions in the writing. I especially recommend reading the afterword in the story. I, again, am very glad that I continued reading this. Surprised at how much I liked this, thanks to the second half of this book. Shockingly, actually came out to 4 stars in the end. I can't wait to pick up Indian Burial Ground.
I've been eyeing Indian Burial Ground a lot lately at my library, so honestly filming this intro clip might be what pushes me to officially go check that out. Okay, so by this point, I was really hopeful for this last book that it was going to be a 5-star, that we would at least have one in this video. And so I read Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Tann. This is another one I've been highly anticipating, not just because of the mythology element, but because I heard it has purple prose writing, and that is definitely up my alley. That is something I tend to very much enjoy. I'm not sure if I would quite label this as a retelling of the moon goddess story from Chinese mythology, but in this we are following the daughter of the moon goddess. She has lived in exile with her mother on the moon for most of her life, but unfortunately when her existence is discovered, she is forced to flee and ends up in the celestial kingdom alone, having to disguise her identity and desperate. However, one day she ends up meeting the crown prince himself actually, and manages her way into being his companion, learning archery and magic alongside him. 𝗖cie is determined to use everything she learns to save her mother from her exile. This one was the first in her duology, and I was really hoping I would just get lost in this world and maybe immediately pick up the next book.
Hey guys, so this update is a lot sooner than expected because unfortunately I've come to the decision that I am going to be DNFing Daughter of the Moon Goddess. This was very unexpected. I'm about 32% in and I am just insanely underwhelmed. I did not think that was going to happen here because I've seen so many glowing reviews for this book, and a trend I've seen among not only the positive reviews but the negative reviews is that this has purple prose, and that does tend to be a writing style I enjoy. However, I think it's other parts of the writing style which are where this book is falling down for me. I also think another major issue with this is it was marketed as an adult high fantasy. This reads so young adult. That's not inherently a bad thing, but you need to set up the right expectations for the book. As much as I like the flowery descriptions, they're also matched with this very formal dialogue style that just feels so inauthentic, and like it doesn't matter that these are supposed to be immortal beings. Nobody talks like that. It feels so stilted, and then the pacing itself is incredibly wonky and somehow manages to feel really, really fast and draggingly slow. We're either seeing every little moment of our main character's day, or we're jumping over the major points where we could be seeing development of her character. Whether that's her learning to become a warrior or the developing romance with the prince, both of those aspects of the story are being completely glossed over. On top of that, since the dialogue is so stilted and stiff, all of our characters also feel that way, and I just don't really think anybody has that much personality. As I said, I was about 32% in when I decided to put this down, and unfortunately, by that point, our main character really has made such little progress in trying to save her mother, the moon goddess. I mentioned there was the romance that was developing, which is kind of a Romeo and Juliet situation, but even though we're told feelings are supposed to have developed between these two over years, because that is so glossed over, it really feels very insta-lovey. We're just seeing a few days of these two interacting. I'm also still not really sure how magic itself works because it's just not really used very often. And although this cast of characters are supposed to be immortals and, you know, living in the higher realm, they feel so incredibly human and boring. So yeah, this was a big freaking letdown. I did not see that coming. I really thought I was gonna love this book, but I'm just so underwhelmed and bored, and I don't want to continue reading.
And on that note, yeah, this video was a bit of a fail. Okay, I'm not gonna say it was a fail because I did have 3 really strong 4 stars. I am still interested in work from many of these authors, but unfortunately this one did not turn out to be a 5 by 5. However, I would love to do another one of these that is based in mythology retellings. So if you have any recommendation for books that fall under that category, please leave them in the comments down below. I definitely want them. Hopefully my next round will go a little bit better. But on that note, that is it for today, y'all. Thank you so much for coming to my channel. I really appreciate it. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, leave me the campfire emoji in the comments. I have all my socials as well as a few ways you can support me linked in the description. I come out with videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye!